Mr. Berenson, Dr. Burnett just testified that there is no causal link between marijuana and mental health disorders. Do you care to comment on that statement?
I would strongly disagree with that statement. In any one case, it's going to be hard to unwrap correlation and causation. But when you look at large national data sets, you can see clearly, for example, in Scotland in the last few years, with the increased use of cannabis by young people, there's been a large increase in psychiatric presentations related to cannabis psychosis. U.S. mental health data is quite bad, so we are sort of stuck looking at other countries. But I mean, this is what Tell Your Children is all about. There's been really a generation now of science and research conducted by people who really don't have any ideological reasons to put their thumb on the scale. And among other things, there's data looking at temporality. So does evidence of psychosis predate cannabis use? Does evidence of cannabis use predate psychosis? Is there a back and forth? When you follow enough people long enough for enough years, you can see clearly that the causality runs in the direction of use, leading to higher rates of severe mental illness. So I would disagree strongly about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cook. I want to address something that you started out in your opening statement about the three myths. Three of the myths we're discussing here today, and also something that came up in Senator Padilla's questioning. You talked about retroactive changes to criminal law and the myth that they do no harm. Senator Padilla called for the expungement and resentencing. I think you're talking about the same things, or at least one is the predicate of the other, making criminal law and sentencing changes retroactive, so felons in prison can then go and have their records expunged and then be resentenced or even released. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, sir.
And your most basic point was this is a complete and utter waste of time of law enforcement officials and prosecuting attorneys who should be spending their time arresting and getting convictions of criminals who are committing crimes today, as opposed to spending their time on felons who've been sitting in prison for years trying to get a second bite of the apple. Is that right?
That is exactly right, sir. And what my bigger point is that this would be extraordinarily disruptive to the federal criminal justice system, because the number of criminals in prison who have some form of prior conviction for a marijuana drug trafficking offense or similar offense, every one of those would have to come back. Every one of them would have to be reviewed. Every one of them would have to be resentenced. And to say that would be disruptive would be an extraordinary understatement.
So let's just look carefully at that situation. And again, building on your previous testimony that there are, in effect, no federal prisoners who are in federal prison for mere possession of amounts of marijuana that are used for personal consumption versus drug traffickers and drug kingpins. Do drug traffickers who are involved in multiple types of trafficking sometimes take a plea deal where they plead guilty to one type of charge, like say marijuana trafficking, in exchange for prosecutors dropping other charges?
Happens every day. In fact, the statistics I mentioned earlier on the southwest border reflect that people involved in distribution quantities are pleading down to simple possession cases, but it happens every day in every district.
Okay. So you've been a federal prosecutor for more than a day. If federal prosecutors think that sentences for certain types of crimes will be retroactively changed or even eliminated by legislation down the road, would you expect that they'd stop offering so many plea deals?
Absolutely, they're going to have to, and what they'll have to do is load up on people to get them to plead to everything that they anticipate won't be made illegal.
So if prosecutors don't offer so many plea deals and they do, as you say, load up on the charges, will average sentences in the federal prison population increase or decrease?
Increase, without a question.
So it sounds like this legislation would be hurting the very people it's trying to help.
It would in certain categories, absolutely.
All right, one final line here. Let's say we have a repeat drug trafficker who's been convicted several times of trafficking different kinds of drugs, say marijuana and cocaine. If he's convicted a third time, this time let's say of fentanyl, trafficking, or maybe for using a gun in that crime, then the fact that he has those 2 prior federal drug convictions means he'll face a tougher sentence. Isn't that right?
It is.
If his marijuana conviction is later expunged and he is resentenced without that past marijuana trafficking conviction on his record, would that fentanyl trafficker get a reduced sentence or be released earlier?
The change in criminal history is going to affect convicted felons in a number of ways. First, many career offenders, individuals classified as career offenders, their criminal history category will change and their sentence could be substantially reduced. Likewise, individuals who are enhanced under 21841B1 A, B, and C, all of those call for enhanced sentences for prior felony drug convictions. Every one of those individuals would have to be resentenced. It'd be a nightmare to administer this in the federal system.
Thank you.
If I could address